2018 Planning Commission meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Present.
Commissioner Stedjink.
Present.
Vice Chair Clifford.
Present.
Commissioner Kraske.
Here.
Okay, and moving on to the salute to the flag. And Commissioner Kreski, would you lead us in that?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving on to administrative business. Do I have a motion for the approval of the order of agenda? Commissioner Stedjan?
I make a motion to approve the order of agenda.
Can I have a second? Commissioner Kreski seconds. We have a motion and a second. Please vote. My vote. This is me over here? No, that's me. Thank you. And that motion passes 4-0. So we'll move on now to approval of the minutes for October 15, 2018. Let me clear. I'm going to clear this. Commissioner Stedjan?
I make a motion to approve the order of approval of minutes, October 15th, 2018.
And a second? Commissioner Rubenstein?
I can't. I was
Oh, Commissioner Kreski?
But you don't have to.
Yeah, make a motion a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that motion passes. Okay, moving on to designation of a liaison to the city council meeting, 11/13th, a Tuesday, an appeal of MUP-1-18. Staff report, please.
We will have an appeal of the second marijuana use permit heard by the Planning Commission, and so we would like to request a liaison from the Planning Commission to attend City Council meeting. And again, as you mentioned, this is because of the Veterans Day holiday. It will be the 13th, which is a Tuesday night.
What time's that?
The meeting starts at 7 p.m.
Not seeing any lights. I'll go ahead and volunteer for that. Okay, and now we're on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. This time is allowed. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. And I don't have any cards. Is anybody interested in speaking tonight? I'm seeing no one coming forward, so I'm going to close oral communications. And we're going to move on to we do have a consent item tonight, and it's file number 2018-050, report on the planning administrator's use permit determination for 80 West Manor Drive. Do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Typically, the consent calendar is taken as a group without staff report, but if the Commission would like a brief explanation of the item, I'm happy to provide it.
Please do.
So this item is brought before you due to a municipal code requirement that indicates that within the coastal zone commercial districts, the only permitted uses are visitor serving uses. Other uses which would otherwise be permitted in a commercial district, such as typical office or personal services type uses, may be permitted upon completion of what's called a use permit determination. It's a process specified in the municipal code which essentially requires an evaluation of the number of visitor serving versus non-visitor serving uses in a particular commercial district, as well as comparison of the proposed use to policies within the local coastal plan, including the neighborhood narrative for the particular district in question. And so in this case, we have an application to locate a photography and videography type creative services use, which we believe falls under the definition of professional office under the personal services category. Seeing as it's not a visitor serving use, staff performed the analysis that's indicated in the staff report, and it's staff's recommendation that this particular use would not on its own cause an imbalance in the visitor serving to non-visitor serving uses in the area, and would be consistent with the local coastal plan narrative and objectives for the area. So it's staff's recommendation to accept the planning administrator's decision that a use permit is not required. In the event the commission objects, 2 commissioners would have to vote to require a use permit, and then we would bring it back in the future after processing the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And is this, as a consent item, is this open do I open the public comment on this?
Only, you can ask if there's anybody from the public who'd like to pull it from the consent calendar.
Okay. I'm going to ask if there's anybody present from the public who would like to pull this item from the consent calendar. And if not, and I see no one, so that's that. We will move on to bringing it back to the commission for a decision. Commissioner Stedjan?
If there's no other comments, I make a motion that we approve 2018-050, accept the planning administrator's determination that a use permit is not required.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
I second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that motion passes unanimously. Now we're going to move on to a presentation from the Library Advisory Committee, and please come up and give us your presentation.
So just a little introduction through the chair. So this evening, we're going to get a presentation from Andrea of Group 4 Architecture. They are the firm that's assisting the city with our conceptual design of new library facilities. I believe, as the commission is aware, the community had strong feelings about keeping a 2-library system, and so the Library Advisory Committee and staff and Group 4 were charged with coming up with creative solutions to allow that to happen with a limited budget. And one of the things you'll hear from Andrea today is an update on how that has progressed. And one of the innovative solutions is to have an open access library model for, excuse me, for the Sanchez branch. And so you'll hear a little bit about what that means. And it'll actually result in more access to the facility for not only library programs, but also for community and recreational programs. So I just wanted to acknowledge that also here this evening is Cindy Abbott, the Library Advisory Committee Chair, if there's any questions for her as a committee member, as well as Commissioner Clifford also sat as the liaison on the Library Advisory Committee. And we also have Director Mike Perez from Parks, Beaches, and Recreation, if there's any questions in that area. So I'll let Andrea start.
Thank you, Tina. Good evening, commissioners. Excited to share with you our progress on the library and the vision for the 2-branch system. So as you see, it's a quick agenda here. I just kind of wanted to go over, as Tina mentioned, the council direction that we've received, that vision for the 2-branch system for both the Sanchez as well as the Sharp Park Library. The outreach results that we've gotten to date, and then the next steps for the project. So as Tina mentioned, in January, the council directed city staff to research and do a preliminary research as a two-branch library system, including 1 large branch and 1 small branch, and directed further evaluation of that. They did select the existing Sharp Park Library site for that large branch facility, and to proceed with a conceptual design and evaluation for funding for that, and as well as selected the Sanchez Library site location for the small branch library. Since January, we've been working with city staff and the Library Advisory Committee on looking at both of those directions. And when we came back to City Council in late September with the idea of how to operate a two-branch library system within the existing framework of the operational budget that the city has identified, we're looking at some new ways to operate the Sanchez with this open access library and other community programming operational models. And we shared that with them, and they're excited and directed us to reach out to the community to get feedback on that and then report back to them later on this year on what we've been hearing from the community. So when we think about the vision for this two-branch library system, the first being that large branch scenario, this is the Sharp Park Library site location. This large branch would be what we would call a full-service 21st century library. It would offer the full suite of library services, everything from seating, technology, family place, quiet space, spaces for children, youth, as well as teens, and a variety of some unique features that are new to libraries, such as quiet study spaces, potential gallery information, and other collaborative maker spaces and community partner spaces. So really a full suite, and this scenario would really look to having a service model that really complements that and enhances the services at the Sharp Park Library. And then when we look at the small branch scenario, this is a little bit more of a limited access as far as library services go. There would still be those core library services of collection, technology, the multi-purpose room to support the wonderful programs that the library is currently doing out there. And then looking at possibilities to enhance library services through staff efficiencies, materials vending and self-service, all sorts of new ways that technology has allowed libraries to remain open and more viable with potentially limited staff use, to really work within the framework of the city's operational budget, and then enhance those library services with other partners that can bring in additional programs and resources through community spaces and other community programs. And so this is where, working with the Library Advisory Committee, the San Mateo County Library, and city staff, we came up with this idea of an open access library. And so we have just a short video just to sort of explain a little bit about what that means, and hopefully this just rolls right into it. Woohoo! A little bit of an elevator music to keep you engaged here. And so what an open access library...
Your library card into your library key to use your library for longer every week, even when staff are not there, by using your South Gloucestershire Active Card and PIN. At your library there are books and services available for all ages. Or you could just enjoy using the warm and well-lit space to meet friends, study, relax and read. In your library, you can also access and use the free Wi-Fi, library computers, and printing facilities. You will never be short of something to read with a click and collect reservations. Or why not browse the library shelves and take out any books that interest you or take your fancy. You can also return or renew your books and avoid any late fees. You can now do all of this in many of our libraries, morning until evening, 7 days a week.
And so I'll do a little bit of more explanation in case you couldn't quite hear that. So basically what the open access library entails is the idea that library patrons can sign up with and get a special library card, which would grant them access to the library when the library is not open or regularly staffed with library staff. And so you'd be able to scan that card, similar to how if you've ever used your ATM or credit card to get into an ATM vestibule. So there would be access to that library. Once you've entered in the library, as the video indicated, you would still have access to collections, technology, the idea that you could still be able to potentially access printers and photocopying services. You would be able to access any type of electronic resource, use a computer, connect to the free Wi-Fi. You'd also be able to access your holds and pick up those holds, and then check out and either check in or check out any material as well. And so through the way technology, just how phones are changing our lives, the way that self-service is doing, you can do this all without a library staff present. And there would still be access to library staff, either through a hotline, a phone that's dedicated to that, or through online e-chatting. So you would still have access to the library resources and their personnel, although they just wouldn't be physically on site. So virtually you'd be able to connect to the library and those resources. And what this allows is that the library can really be open up to 7 days a week. And so you would have additional hours at the Sanchez Library for that community. And there's really 3 different types of ways that this facility might be open. One would be that it is actually open and library staff are present, and so you could still access any of the self-service models and then have a library staff there. We're also looking at potentially partnering, as Tina mentioned, with Parks, Beach, and Recreation, and so they might be there doing a program, and so it might be staffed by city staff, and the library would still be open there, and there would be opportunities where there would be no city staff or library staff there, and it would be in a sort of a self-service role or model only. And so multiple ways that the library could be opened, giving it a lot of flexibility and really being able to enhance and expand the library services and hours to that Sanchez community, even though this is in the small branch category. And so that's the type of kind of open access model that we've been bringing to the community. These are some opportunities. We've been working with Parks, Beach, and Recreation on different ideas and events that could happen and that they might sponsor. And we're bringing this list of programs and activities to the community to get their feedback on what might be most interesting to them. So anything from meeting rooms for groups or community groups or activities, classes that they might be hosting, senior activities, teen and youth events. And those types of activities could happen either outside of the facility. There's an existing courtyard, as well as additional exterior space around the library, as well as inside the library through a shared meeting or program space. And so really looking at different types of partners and collaborative efforts to really enhance the services out there. And so, as you recall, the existing Sanchez Library is limited, only open 4 days a week, and it's just about 4,000 square feet, providing just the minimum library services with seating, collection, and technology. And through this kind of more open access, we can really start to enhance that and build in some flexibility to potentially bring in that out community events or partners to supplement those core library services with other community services. On how that might look as you enter in the building. So this is just a little diagram. The red arrow indicates the current entry to the library, and so that yellow space would be a shared space that is sort of that center lobby space with some seating, potentially some group study rooms or tutoring rooms. The library could fill out one wing of the space with its own, that blue line indicating that that would be secured off when the rest of the facility is not being staffed. And then that would be where the open red triangle would be that 24/7 access with a special key card that allows you access just to the library when only the library is in a self-service model. And then in the red, indicating where there might be an opportunity for that shared community room where the library as well as city staff or other community groups could rent that community room and provide park programs and services to supplement those library services. There's always a possibility for an addition to this facility if funding is available to help enhance and provide some additional space for these types of activities. And these are just some images of what those spaces might look like within that facility. So these are just some very preliminary bubble diagrams to sort of see how this joint use might operate. And then as we look at the existing Sharp Park Library, again, only open 4 days a week with its existing services that is the collection technology and then the vision for that Sharp Park Library, looking at a facility that's, like we said, a large branch facility in the 25 to 30,000 square foot range, and has the full complement of library services as illustrated in the diagram here. And we wanted to just share some preliminary ideas as we're entering in the conceptual design phase for the Sharp Park Library. So this just starts to indicate how that library might operate. As you know, the Sharp Park Library has some challenges with its topography, and so how do we work with that existing site, and how does the facility start to stack as we look to increase the square footage on that site. So we're looking at underground parking and then 2 stories of library service and community room spaces. So the first and second floor would house the library as well as the large community room that would be available for after-hour rentals and use. And so we wanted to share just some preliminary diagrams, site capacity studies for that. And we're looking at a number of different scenarios, and we'd love your feedback on these as well. The first diagram here is showing that we could really anchor and construct, let me see if I can point out, more of a 2-story facility. So again, we have that first lower level for parking, and then the library could really come to the forefront and create more of a 2-story volume as you come down Palmetto, and then we could step back the second floor of the library, or the third floor story for that facility, just to be conscious of the current residential neighbors that are adjacent to the site, as well as the sight lines down the facility, or down Palmetto. And so you can sort of see how that facility fits in, where we would really create a 2-story volume as you come down Palmetto, and then step that third floor back, and how that might stack. And then another idea is to really kind of tier this facility to really kind of minimize the impact of the overall volume of this facility. And so the idea is that only there would appear as though just the first floor, the garage level, would appear as though a single floor. As you come down Palmetto, the first floor of the library would then be stepped back from that, and then stepped further back onto the site. So really taking advantage of the topography and building this facility a little bit more into the hillside. And so that's just another scenario that we're looking at as we're looking at these preliminary conceptual designs for this facility. And what we're doing is currently going out to the community and trying to figure out what the design values for this facility might be. And so we're polling these, and you'll see some preliminary results of that in a minute. And so as Tina mentioned, we're currently out in the community gathering their input on those exterior design values for the Sharp Park Library, as well as program options, visions for the Sanchez Library, getting the feedback on the open access and how that might fit into that community and how they feel about that. And so we actually have a little 1-page summary, and would love for the commissioners and any public members here tonight to engage in this community output. We have just 11 by 17 handout. And so we'd happy to share that with you. You guys can quickly fill it out. It only takes a couple minutes, and then Tina can collect that at the end of the night, and we'll roll that into our community input process. But so far, we've had just over 300 participants engaged in the process. We've been out to Fog Fest. We went to the PEF-a-thon and the fitness fair in the Sanchez community. We've conducted an online survey, which is actually over half of the participants have been engaged in the online survey. That's the 175 participants there. We've been to a number of events in the Sanchez community, really trying to reach out to them. So we've been to a musical story time with them. We have a kiosk set up in the Sanchez Library. We also did a senior lunch program out there, or senior book club, a pop-up library, a Medicare program, as well as an after-school STEAM program. So really trying to reach out to all age groups in that community. And the feedback that we've been hearing is, first, we've been asking, what library do you currently use? And since we've been sort of targeting the Sanchez Library, we've obviously been getting a lot of responses and positive responses from them about them really utilizing that library. But there's still a large number of users of the Sharp Park Library, as you can see here. And then as we look at the types of library services in this open access model that the community really feels important to, and I think the number one that, as you could all imagine, is really being open and available 7 days a week, being able to browse the connection, being able to pick up their holds and drop off materials, and then maintain the wonderful library programs that are currently happening out in the Sanchez Library. Followed by seating, and then lastly, being able to use a printer or being able to print things. When we asked them about the types of community activities that they might want to see outside of library programs, but other community city programs that might be interested to them, the preschool kids programs, community events, enrichment classes, teen programs, and are sort of rounding out the top 4, followed closely by senior programs, dance and exercise, and being able to use the facility for community use or rentals. And then as we've been asking about the exterior design values for the Sharp Park Library, number 1 being the coastal design, really making sure that we design to the coast, making sure that the facility is really warm and welcoming, and obviously takes advantage of the site context. I think that's no surprise there with the beautiful views that exist on that site. And so the next steps that we have, we're going to be continuing the outreach. We have a couple more events. We have the tree lighting at Rockaway Beach. The online survey will maintain and will stay open. And then we'll also be going to Parks Beach and Recreation Commission meeting on 11/28. And then concluding the options phase at the end of the year, and then coming back in January with the recommended conceptual design to City Council in January and April. And so trying to wrap this up in April with a direction from City Council. And so happy to answer any questions that the commissioners may have.
Does anybody have any questions for?
Questions or feedback?
Yeah, questions? Thank you.
Commissioner Sturgeon?
I saw your film was from the South Gloucester Library there, and I took a look, and they've got about 245,000 residents and 141 homeless people there. We've essentially got a homeless rate about 3 times that. Are there any methods or security we're going to take to prevent homeless people from living in this library when it's unattended?
Yes, so there's a variety of different ways. One would be that the library would be under constant video surveillance if it wasn't staffed by a library member. And so there would be that methodology. There's also ways to make sure that access, one would have to get granted access to use the open access model. So it's not a given right, but it is something that you sign up for. And if there was any sort of violation or any issues with certain members, that privilege could potentially be revoked. So I think there's a number of different ways that the city and the library could maintain and offer a secure, safe environment. And Tina, I don't know if you have.
I just wanted to add that we are engaging the police department in the discussion at this point, so that their input will be valuable, of course, while we're completing the design and moving into more of the finer details of how that model will operate.
So would it be the police department that was monitoring that video 24 hours a day?
That we haven't gotten to that level of detail in our conversations, if they would have that feed in their office.
My question is for the city attorney. Do we have it within our right to ban homeless folks from this library if they violated certain conditions?
And anybody could be prohibited from using the library if they violated certain conditions, but, you know, it would have to be not based upon, of course, upon status, but the activities.
We'd essentially give them a no trespass order or something, and how would that
Well,
work?
it would depend on the circumstances, but yes, you could get, well, I don't know that you would necessarily need a judicial order in order to do it, because if it was a prohibition that the city came up with based upon that individual's conduct, I think that could be something that could be looked at too. But there are several different ways to address it.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Then I thank you very much, because I don't have any either.
Thank you.
All right, going to move on. For the continued public hearing, UP 104-18, CDP 400-18, and coastal development permit, that is the CDP. Anyway, for the
Mr. Vice
installation.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We had one more item, item 3, which is
Oh,
Library Advisory
oh,
Committee.
I am sorry, I skipped right ahead
You
of
guys
that.
are all excited about the library. See if anybody wanted to
Okay.
volunteer to take your spot on the Library
Yeah,
Advisory Committee.
Yes, there is, thank you very much for reminding me of that. So we are looking for a volunteer for the Library Advisory Committee. And as I remember, Commissioner Kresge was
Yeah.
thinking about that.
Yeah. Sure. I can volunteer for that.
Well, thank you very much. We now have a new representative at the Library Advisory Committee.
We have to vote on.
We have to vote on it? I don't. Tina, do we have to vote on this?
Sure, let's vote on it.
Okay. So we'll need a motion? Commissioner Stegin?
I make a motion to appoint Ryan Kraske as the Library Advisory Committee liaison.
And Commissioner Rubenstein?
Yep, second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. And now we'll move on to the cell phone towers. Okay. So this is for file number 2018-018, use permit UP 104-18, and coastal development permit CDP 400-18 for the installation of a new wireless communication facility consisting of a 2-foot tall by 10-inch wide canister antenna mounted atop a 6-foot vertical extension attached to an existing utility pole and associated pole-mounted equipment with within the public right-of-way in the vicinity of 560 San Pedro Avenue. Can I have a staff report, please?
Good evening. My name is Contract Planner Ranu Agarwal, and I'm accompanied by Senior Planner Christian Murdoch, who I'd like to thank for his contribution to the staff report. The project before you is the installation of a new wireless communication facilities with an antenna which is 2 feet tall and 10-inch wide canister antenna, and the equipment that goes with that. The antenna is going to be mounted, or as proposed, is going to be mounted on a 6-foot extension attached to the top of a 30-foot, 5-inch tall existing wooden utility pole, which would lead to an 8-foot, 3-inch increase in height above the existing pole. The equipment itself will consist of a power meter, an electric load center, 2 remote radio units, fiber distribution a panel, and 2 diplexers, which will be mounted on a C channel. And this would, the equipment would project about 1 foot 6 inches from the face of the pole and would be side mounted on the pole. Per section 9-4.2606C of the Pacifica Municipal Code, antennas of all types in the public or private right-of-way are considered a conditional use and require a use permit. Hence, this project requires a use permit. It also requires a coastal development permit, as the site is located in the coastal zone. The Planning Commission must make 6 findings, 3 standard use permit findings and 3 supplemental findings for use permit for a wireless communications facility. And additionally, there are standards in Article 26 of the Pacifica Municipal Code, which set certain general standards for such facilities in all locations. And the relationship of these standards to the facilities, the use permit findings, and the coastal development permit findings are summarized and discussed in the staff report. Of note in this location is that the extension above the existing pole is proposed to be 6 feet. According to certain limitations in the code, section 9-4.2608E1 of the code limits the vertical height increase of a wireless communications facility which is attached to an existing utility pole, street light, or traffic signal pole to 2 feet above the top of the support structure. And only 2 exceptions are allowed to that limitation. One, when it is necessary to comply with regulatory requirements, or when it is necessary for health and safety reasons. So the applicant didn't cite any health and safety reasons for which they needed to have that height above the pole. They did cite a regulatory requirement of the General Order 95 of the California Public Utilities Commission to justify the height increase. And staff did some research, talked to PG&E staff, and in its analysis discovered that the requirement would be sufficiently satisfied with an extension which was 4 feet above the pole. So has conditioned the project so that we have a less visually impactful facility with extension above the pole, where the extension above the pole is 4 feet for the extension and 2 feet antenna above the pole. With regards to the equipment, the applicant has proposed to paint this equipment, which is of a sleeker design as compared to when we started working with them on this project. And they have decided to paint this the same color as the pole, or to match the pole and reduce the visual impacts in that manner. So we have included a condition to reduce the height of the extension above the pole so that the total height of the installation is brought down by about 2 feet. And as conditioned, staff believes that the project is approvable and recommends approval of the project as conditioned. And that concludes the presentation. I'm available to answer any questions at this time, and the applicant is here as well.
Are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Stedjan?
My question for the city attorney, do we have any liability there, like when we exceed the height on the NJCPA? Do we have any liability if we exceed the height and the pole owner says, hey, that violated the Northern California Joint Pole Agreement?
No.
Thank you.
And I had one question, and that is, what is the width of this extension? We talked about the height of it, but I'd kind of like to get an idea of how wide it is, because the actual device is 10 inches wide.
It's about 6 inches.
It's about 6
The unit
inches.
extension, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll now open it to the applicant to come up and speak. You have 10 minutes.
Hi, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having us here. My name's Angela Kung. I'm with AT&T. We're here and we're really excited to present to you this small cell site. And just to give you a little bit of background for small cell, the reason we're using this in this particular site is because in most cases you've seen those large macros that we have. What this does, small cell is the new technology that what it does is it offloads from the macros. So it'll give you more capacity and better coverage. And it's really primarily for areas that are high density and also that have different terrain. So whether there's a lot of trees or hilly or windy roads. And so in this case, Pacifica is kind of the perfect terrain for this, because instead of staying a big macro right there, you're able to put it on top of current light poles and utility poles. We're also doing it because it also it lessens the impact of the right-of-way. We're not adding more clutter to it, so we're going on existing light poles and existing utility poles. So we're really excited about this. We've worked with your planners very extensively to try to reduce to what we can. We're giving you the best technology we have, the biggest and brightest right now, and so we're happy to present and also answer any questions following the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abby Reed. I'm the land use planner working on this site. I work with Modus, an authorized representative of AT&T. And here today we also have Bill Hammett from Hammett & Edison, an independent third-party engineer who can speak to any emissions safety questions as they relate to the FCC guidelines. So Angela just went through a brief run-through of why we need small cells in Pacifica. And here's a historical background. The AT&T radio frequency engineer determined a need for these locations in September 2017. AT&T worked diligently with Pacifica staff since the submittal date in March 2018 to propose the least intrusive, most streamlined design. We went through 2 design iterations to ensure that what you have in front of you is the stealthiest design. We were originally assigned a public hearing date on September 5th, but continued the hearing to address planning staff's concerns regarding the equipment design. And then we reduced the design to the minimum design that's technically feasible at both these sites. So here's just a map that shows where the sites are located in Pacifica. Node 1 is located in the northwest portion of Pacifica in front of 560 San Pedro Avenue in Pedro Point Shelter Cove neighborhood. Node 3 is located in the southeast portion of the city across from 690 Odstad Boulevard in the Linda Mar neighborhood. So you can just see them there for context. And so the first node we're going to talk about is the one in front of 560 San Pedro Avenue. Here is an aerial view. It just shows, if you can see, the property line is the dotted line, and then we're a little bit north of that, so it shows that we're in the public right-of-way. Here is a photo simulation of what the site would look like. So the equipment and the antenna, as you can see here, would be camouflaged with the pole, so we would paint it to match the color of the pole. And so the first node is located in front of Ace Hardware Store, and this site would provide increased data speeds and cell phone reception to a portion of Highway 1, 3 commercial shopping centers, and dozens of residents south and east of the node. So here is a page from our construction drawings, and it just shows the elevations. So the top of this antenna would be at 38 feet 8 inches, and the equipment is mounted from 7 to 18 feet. And all of these the equipment clearances are subject to California Public Utility Commission's General Order 95 standards and have been approved by PG&E. From the first iteration, we reduced the cubic square feet of the radios from 2.55 cubic feet to 2 cubic feet and removed an additional fiber box that was previously required. We also work with the city to co-design the antenna extension, lowering the pole extensions from 7 to 6 feet, which is the minimum requirement per GO 95, PG&E's general order. And the following slides are in reference to agenda item number 5, which is our second proposed small cell facility. So I'll speak more on these later on when that agenda item is called. So as we said, these sites are necessary to provide necessary capacity relief and close the service coverage gap. The small cell nodes need to be placed in areas with poor signal quality and high usage. MODIS, in conjunction with AT&T radio frequency engineer and PG&E, walked the sites to identify the best locations for these facilities that meet both GO 95 requirements, AT&T's requirements, and the Pacifica Municipal Code. As part of our due diligence, we eliminated nearby utility structures that did not meet these requirements. As such, we respectfully request that you adopt planning staff's recommendation to approve the projects. And let me know if you have any site-specific questions. I'm happy to answer those.
Does the commission have any questions? I had one question, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it.
Okay.
Can you go back to the picture of the pole?
Yes.
With the...
With the design, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. On top of the light, I'm seeing a device with, it looks like 3 little antennas on it. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I think it's some sort of solar, I think it's some sort of solar device. We walked this site with PG&E, so we know that it would not interfere with our antenna. I'm not 100% sure what it is.
I guess my question isn't whether or not it will interfere with your antenna.
Right.
My question is will your antenna interfere with whatever that is supposed to be doing?
If I may, Commissioner, this is an abandoned wireless site. I believe it was Pacific Coast that used to do Wi-Fi service in the city, which kind of closed down maybe like 8 years ago. So it doesn't have a function anymore. It is just that it has not been removed from that pole yet.
Thank you very much for that. I really needed to know that we weren't going to cause somebody else problems by approving this. Okay, and Commissioner Stegin?
Just roughly doing the math, looks like you're going for a 26% increase in height there. Can you name another city in San Mateo County that's allowed you that height increase?
That's allowed that height increase? Yeah, I mean, we have multiple jurisdictions that we're moving forward with these designs. We've built some in Atherton. We have sites that are going through in San Bruno, Daly City. It's all up and down the peninsula, and a bunch of sites in San Francisco as well have been constructed.
So there's ones in Atherton that have been approved at 38 feet?
Yeah, or higher, actually. So PG&E requires a 6-foot clearance, but we usually use a 7-foot bayonet. So this is actually lower than the other sites that have been pushed through other jurisdictions.
How many poles total will you be applying to raise to the site in Pacifica
For Pacifica, we have a total of 3 2-wood poles.
at this time? But is there a plan to raise more?
At this time, we only know of these 3, so for the immediate future, it'll just be 3 sites.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no questions for the applicant, I'm going to let you sit down, and then I'll open the public hearing with the public comment. And the public will have 3 minutes. I do have one card for this particular item, and that is Jeremy Greenberg. And if you'd like to come forward, you will have 3 minutes to speak on this item.
My name is Jeremy Greenberg, and I live at 1348 Grand Avenue on Pedro Point, and I am opposed to this antenna going up because it would put this communication antenna directly in view of my living room and kitchen windows. One of my main reasons is for opposing this installation is based on research and documentation collected by the National Association of Realtors showing that the installation of cell towers and cell antennas, other high-frequency communication antennas, have a negative effect on property values up to 20% and higher. Also, 90% of homeowners or home buyers and renters are less likely to want to live in a home that's next to a cell tower or antenna and will look for property elsewhere that's not so close. The house I live in is located on Pedro Point, as I said. It was appraised at $750,000 back in 2015, and a 20% drop in value is $150,000, so there is a financial application there. One thing I noticed, there is already a group of cell communication towers located on the hillside near Fassler Avenue, which overlooks Pedro Point. And I don't know why they couldn't put the antenna up there on one of those existing towers. The other thing I found is once this antenna has been installed, it can be increased, according to what I've seen, another additional 20 feet with no public due process or hearing under the section 6409A of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012. So I'm just wondering if that would apply to this antenna or not, if it could, once it's installed. Oh, looks like I'm out of time.
You have 1 more minute.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm pretty much done here, but like I say, I do not want this eyesore directly visible, a little less than 100 yards away from my living room window and kitchen window, because I'm planning on selling my house in the fairly near future. And I think this would be very detrimental. And that's basically all I have to say. So I'm just hoping you will oppose this installation and maybe look for other solutions other than putting it right, directly radiating right into my window and then the other houses close by. So that's all I have to say about that. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring it back to closed public hearing because I'm not seeing anybody else coming up, and I have no more cards, so we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
If I may, I just wanted to clarify that we are setting forth a condition for this project to reduce the height of the extension. So that's something that the applicant had mentioned was 6 feet. We have placed a condition where we need that reduction down to 4 feet.
Okay, and is one of the conditions that's already before us, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, the applicant may have 3 minutes for a rebuttal period.
Thank you very much for the reminder. Does the applicant wish to rebuttal You have 3 minutes if you would like to rebuttal the comments.
You don't need to rebuttal. We're happy to answer any questions that you guys have, if you have any concerns from what the residents say. So we're happy to answer them if those come up.
Commissioner Sturgeon, you had a question?
Yeah, a question for staff. This will be under Coastal Commission purview, correct? So this would be appealable to Coastal Commission?
That's correct. The coastal development permit associated with this application would be subject to appeal to the Coastal Commission.
I'm not sure if the applicants are engineers or your engineer is here tonight.
Yeah, we have our engineer that's on our,
Yeah, could I ask him a question? I think we've seen him before.
No, it's me.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was the gentleman in back. For some reason, he looked
Well,
awfully familiar.
If you have,
sorry, depending on what engineer you're looking
yeah.
for.
That's all right, you can ask a question. Your goal is to get that maximum height, correct, for maximum range on this
Yeah.
tower?
Correct.
I mean, you're putting it in the absolute lowest place in that neighborhood, in a neighborhood that has hills roughly 200 feet higher than that. Just out of blatant curiosity, why wouldn't you place this at the top of the hill versus
Right.
at the lowest point possible?
Right, so our AT&T radio frequency engineer looks at a SINAR map and he sees where we have a gap in capacity and coverage, and it's usually in a high density area, and then we have to work as hard as we can to find a site that's in the epicenter of that coverage gap. Because these small cells are so low power, we need to be as close to the target area as possible. And it's not always the higher the better, it depends. It usually between 35 and 45 feet to 50 feet are the ideal locations. So height isn't necessarily really what we're going for. It's more just like the location and then being above a certain height where, you know, tree coverage or any of the terrain in Pacifica.
Under what circumstances would height not be better? Higher not be better?
Well, so the small cells are really low power, so the farther you go up, the less effective the range is, if that makes sense. So it's better to be lower to the ground in certain instances because you can spread out and hit more area that way.
So what's the effective range of this tower?
So it depends on the terrain and numerous things, like if there's tree coverage in the way or what it has to permeate through. Generally, it's between 300 and 500 feet is the range.
And with the mitigation that staff has suggested, is that a height of 34 feet? Or a height of, what's the total height that the staff suggested mitigating to?
It's 3510.
3510, and at the height of 3510 will achieve your goals?
Right, so when we received that on Friday, we spoke to the AT&T radio frequency engineer, and he said it's definitely going to be a loss for him. It's not going to be as effective as it could have been otherwise, but we really need the site. It's of immediate need, so he's okay with moving forward with it.
What percentage loss?
He said around 10% loss.
So if we cut it another 33 feet, it would only be another 10% loss?
30 feet?
Yeah.
Oh, 230
Yeah,
feet.
the 32 feet. I'm just curious.
32 feet.
Is
It's not always proportionally related like that. We would have to go back and he would have to run the diagnostics and look at his maps and see. Because after a certain point, if you have a tree or any building that's blocking it and you drop below that, it's going to create shadowing.
My question is for staff. What was the height? What was the maximum height of the Valley Mar antennas we installed last year or 2 years ago?
I don't have that information available.
Thank you. Was that an AT&T project also?
It was.
I believe it was the same engineer that was here, correct? Is that him sitting in the back currently?
Yes, I believe Bill Hammett may have performed the RF emissions modeling for those sites as well.
Could we call him up and ask him?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Bill Hammett. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of California. I manage a firm of 20. We're located up in Sonoma County. and a regular part of our practice is the calculation or the measurement of radio frequency exposure conditions. We do this work for carriers, we do this work for cities, we do it for landlords. As engineers, our job is really straightforward. What are the exposure levels and how they compare to the standard? My report is a matter of record in this proceeding. I'm happy to answer questions on it or anything that relates to that issue.
Yeah, you were helpful in the JPAs in Valimar and Reina Del Mar Street. I remember. Do you remember the maximum height that was approved on those poles?
I don't. I'm sorry. There were a number of different poles at different heights, but I don't know the range standing here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stedging, I think what may be a relevant point for you is that those facilities, in my recollection, did not involve the vertical height increases in the manner that these facilities are proposed. Those typically were able to side mount to the pole and not result in significant height increases. So it's largely a different form of deployment for those facilities.
And it's within our purview to keep their original height, correct? Height request.
If you're asking for this facility, if it's within the commission's purview to approve the originally requested height,
Right.
It's staff's opinion that that would not comply with the zoning ordinance.
Would not.
Would not. The zoning ordinance, as contract planner Agarwal mentioned, limits height increases above 2 feet to 2 scenarios. One is required for health and safety, and the second is required to meet regulatory requirements. In this case, through staff's investigation, the regulatory requirement is only 4 feet above the power lines, not 6 feet, and therefore any height increase above 4 feet to the bottom of the antenna would exceed the allowance under the city's zoning.
Got it. So it's to 34 feet plus the height of the antenna. Is that correct?
So the height increase, if it's exceeding 2 feet, can be up to the regulatory requirement, in this case 4 feet to the bottom of the antenna, and then another 2 feet for the antenna.
And real quick, just because we were going over a lot of heights there, what is the height of this antenna again?
3510? The overall facility would be 35 feet 10 inches. The antenna itself is 2 feet, and the pole extension would then be 4 feet.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions for staff or the applicant? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Anybody wish to have anything to say on this? Okay, I'm not seeing any lights. Then I'm going to ask for a motion. Anybody want to make a motion on this project? Okay, Commissioner Rubenstein?
I'll make a motion to approve it with the 4-foot condition.
Okay, do I have a second on that?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes 4-0. Congratulations, you have an approved project. Anybody that has, I'm trying to look for the the standard thing. You have 10 days to appeal this if you have any, if you choose to appeal it. Thank you. All right, and stumbled through that. All right, and moving on to item number 5, file number 2018-019, use permit UP-105-18 for the installation of a new wireless communication facility consisting of a 2-foot tall by 10-inch wide canister antenna mounted atop a 6-foot, 6-inch extension attached to the top of an existing utility pole and associated pole mounting equipment within the public right-of-way in the vicinity of 720 Odstead Boulevard. May I have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Contract Planner Anu Agarwal. And very similar to the previous item that we just concluded, this project also proposes the installation of a new wireless communications facility. The antenna is 2 feet tall by 10 inches wide canister antenna. It will be mounted atop a 6 foot 6 inch extension, which is attached to a 39 foot 5 inch tall existing wooden utility pole. So the antenna would, the installation would lead to a 8 foot 6 inch increase in height above the existing pole. And as previously discussed, there are requirements that the California Public Utilities Commission has regarding the how much separation they require from power lines. In this case, the power lines are high voltage lines, so they would minimum require a 6 foot separation. But to comply with the Pacifica Municipal Code, we've asked and placed a condition in place that the extension be reduced by 6 inches, so that the maximum height of the facility, including the support structure from grade, doesn't exceed 47 feet 8 inches. Other than that, the equipment is similar to the item we just heard. It will have a power meter, electric load center, 2 remote radio units, and a fiber distribution panel and 2 diplexers, which would be painted the color of the pole. The lowest height for the equipment would be 7 foot above grade, and it goes up from there, but it's a much sleeker design than we started out with. And that concludes presentation. As condition, staff recommendation is to approve this installation.
Any questions for staff? Okay, Commissioner Rubenstein?
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry, I left the lights on from last time. Commissioner Stedjan?
I'm just going to revisit the issue we just talked about the 34-foot hard top plus the height of the antenna there. Am I to believe that if we had a 6-foot antenna, that the total height could be allowed as 40 feet if they were 34 foot to the bottom of the antenna, then 6 foot of antenna, 40 feet total?
I understand the question. I think it's staff's opinion that the antenna size is limited to 2 feet, and extensions above 2 feet on the pole are guided by the health and safety or the regulatory requirement increases. And so seeing as the base increase allowed under the zoning is 2 feet, it's been our position in interpreting the ordinance that the antenna itself is limited to 2 feet, and height increases by the 2 guiding considerations that I mentioned.
Got it. And whose ordinance is that?
City of Pacifica's ordinance.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the applicant to come up and do their presentation.
Hi, thank you. Thanks. So I'm just going to quickly go over the slides that relate to Node 3. So it's across from 690 Odstad Boulevard. Here is the aerial site plan. You can see again the dotted line for that property boundary and then how we're in the public right-of-way. Here is the proposed design, and we have a close-up of the equipment and the top of, or the bottom of the bayonet, the extension at the top of the pole. And Node 3 would provide increased data speeds and reception to dozens of homes, a school, a commercial shopping center, and a church. And it's relatively the same design. The bottom of the equipment, like Renu said, would be 7 feet. The top would be 18 feet, and it's PG&E approved. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, I'll let you go, and I'll open it up to the for public comment. It looks like we're going to have a card coming up.
I can take it, Rick. Thanks.
Okay, and if Rick Zipkin could come forward. He'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. My name is Rick Zipkin, and I live directly across the street at 725 Odstead Boulevard from the proposed installation of a new AT&T wireless communications facility, WCF, including a 7-foot extension on top of an existing utility pole and accessible pole meeting equipment on the 700 block of Odstead Boulevard here in Pacifica, California. Although I have asked and had been answered the following questions about any effects that this said tower would have on my house, etc., and with no disrespect intended whatsoever, I would like to, for the record, so to speak, once again ask and make sure that this proposed tower will have no negative effects on my TV reception, I have Comcast cable service, my phone and internet service, which I do have AT&T phone and internet service, or anything else I have and use in my home. Also, I have not Also, I have not inquired about this in the past, and most importantly, I also am wondering if this tower equipment will in any way emit any type of, radiation-like or microwave light or any type of rays that would harm or hurt us or a little 3.5-pound little doggy when we walk outside our house on or under this proposed tower equipment. If any of these negative things come to fruition, I ask you please to oppose and vote down this said proposal. Again, I mean no disrespect to anyone I have previously talked to about these issues, but procedurally, if you will, I just want to say and state my concerns to you about this proposed AT&T wireless communication facility being erected on the 700 block of Odstead Boulevard, opposite and in front of my house. Thank you very much for your time in listening to my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does the applicant wish to come forward and rebut?
Actually, yes, we have Bill Hammett, who actually had done a report and actually spoken to the gentleman, so he can kind of answer some of the questions.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bill Hammett again. The question was posed by the previous speaker whether there is any negative impact to his enjoyment of TV or internet or telephone. The answer is no, there is no interference. The facilities operate in their own frequency bands, carefully controlled, so that there is no interference from one service to another. He asked the question about his dog and walking his dog. Our calculations indicate that the maximum level, and we know that in reality the levels will be even lower, but the maximum calculated level is more than 25 times below the limit. The limit is intended to provide a prudent margin of safety for 24-hour exposure, 7 days a week, continuous exposure of all persons, large, small, healthy, infirm, old or young. So the answer to his question would be no. The standards are not set for animals, they're set for people, but the actual levels will be at least 25 times below the standard for humans.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions for anybody before I close the public hearing? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to close the public hearing and bring this back to the commission. Anything to discuss, commissioners? Okay, Commissioner Stegin.
And just to be clear, these are one pole centrally in a neighborhood versus a slippery slope where every pole in Pacifica is going to end up to be 40 feet tall, correct?
Well, these operators have a franchise right under state law to locate their facility essentially in the locations that they deem is necessary, and so it's not possible for staff to indicate how many utility poles may ultimately have wireless equipment.
So in absence of a change in Pacifica code, it could be every pole?
The zoning ordinance indicates a 25-foot separation between a pole with equipment and any other vertical support structure, so I would suggest that there would probably be not more than one per 25 feet. But beyond that, we don't have an explicit provision to limit where they may locate.
Do we know how many wireless permits we've approved here in the last, say, 36 months, 3 years?
How many were in AT&T?
Maybe 8 or 9 in Valimar.
There was 10 or 12
I think they were-
in Valleymar. There's these two. I think the applicant indicates there might be one more. And then we are processing from a different carrier about 10 other sites that you'll be seeing.
And we do process not a large number, but I guess I'd describe as a handful of sites through building permits only that qualify for what's called ministerial level review because they are co-locations. And under federal law, we're prohibited from requiring a discretionary permit, which would come to a public hearing, and not a large number of those facilities at all.
Is there any way we can encourage co-location of these different telecom companies?
We can definitely attempt to do that. It's just that they come at different times, and the time period between one application and by a carrier, another carrier would be, they're not contemporaneous, so to see whether they can be co-locating on a new structure at the same time would be a challenge, and they could possibly co-locate if they meet their coverage objectives, and that is something we would have to figure out once we have those applications in.
But just to be clear, AT&T has every right to deny another carrier's use of these antennas, correct?
If you mean the support structure, I'm not sure AT&T owns the support structures. They're
No,
owned
the
by
actual antennas.
Well, I believe you're correct. They are AT&T's antennas, yes.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, let's have some deliberation up here. Anybody got any questions, any comments?
Vice Chair Clifford, if I may interject, it may be helpful for the record to state that Commissioner Niblin arrived at 8:04 p.m. during staff's presentation of this item. In the event there's a motion and a vote, and we record his vote, we know how he showed up. So, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for being late.
That's quite all right. So, thank you for noting that. I appreciate that. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay, and do I have a second for that? Okay, Commissioner.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote.
I'm only seeing 4 votes registered on the machine.
Actually, owing to my late arrival, I intend to abstain. If in fact it becomes necessary for me to vote, I would want some, perhaps to summarize whatever it is I missed with the deliberation.
Okay, so that passes with a vote of 4, with 1 abstention.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody aggrieved by the Planning Commission's decision has 10 calendar days to appeal. Okay, and now at this time, I am going to recuse myself and turn the meeting over to Commissioner Neblin.
Oh, you want that?
I do.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Good evening. We're switching out the name plates here to make sure that we're accurately identifying everyone up here. That takes us then to item 6, I think, on the agenda. This is a new public hearing. The matter that we'll be considering then is file number 2014-02, Site Development permit, PSD 78914, coastal development permit, CDP 34614, use permit 03914, sign exception, SC 03018, parking exception, PE 15914, and heritage tree removal authorization for the construction of three two-story buildings accommodating a surf shop, ancillary office storage, board shaping and storage, and retail with residential above, as well as a skate park attached to one of the buildings, and associated improvements on a vacant lot located at 505 San Pedro Avenue. It's assessor's parcel number 023-072010. The recommended CEQA action is the adoption of a mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And the recommended action is to approve as conditioned. We'll have a staff report then.
Good evening. I'm Contract Planner Ranu Agarwal, accompanied by Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. I'd like to thank him for his contribution to the staff report. The project before you proposes the construction of 3 buildings and associated improvement on a 37,538 square foot long and narrow parcel as shown up on the screen on San Pedro Avenue west of the Peter Point Shopping Center. The major components of the project include 3 buildings, where building 1 is the one that you see in that image to the far right, which will include surf shop building for retail sales, surfboard rentals, lockers, and office storage space with a storage basement and an outdoor shower. That's a 2-story building. The second building in the middle, that's also a 2-story building for storage and surfboard shaping, which is attached to a covered skate park, which is proposed to be enclosed by a chain link fence. Building number 3, which is to the left on that image, is also a 2-story mixed-use building with retail space and office storage on the first floor and 2 residential units on the second floor. The project proposes off-street parking for 26 cars, 24 of which are uncovered car spaces associated with the commercial use on the property, and there are 2 garage spaces on the first floor of building number 3 for the residential units above. The project is going to require a parking exception because the required number of parking for this development is 50 car spaces plus bike and EV charging spaces that they would require. The project also proposes removal of 2 heritage trees on site. There are 3 in all right now, Monterey cypress trees. 2 of them are heritage trees. It proposes the removal of those trees as well as 3 eucalyptus trees which are in the right-of-way in the San Pedro Avenue. So the permits that are requested are the site development permit, coastal development permit, use permit, sign exception, parking exception, and heritage tree removal authorization. Of note and major items for consideration here are the parking exception. So as I just mentioned, the total number of required parking spaces is 40 cars, 50 cars, 47 for the commercial portion and 3 for residential, 2 of which should be covered. The applicant is proposing 26 car spaces, 24 allocated to commercial and 2 garage spaces for the residential. They proposed, they've shown bike parking for 5 bicycles, which is what would be required, but it is not per standard. And there are 2 EV charging stations which would be required with this facility, which have not been proposed as part of the project. With respect to the parking exception, there are 2 exceptions, the residential parking exception and the commercial parking exception. With regards to residential, staff analysis indicates that if they were to provide, they would have to reduce either the number of units from 2 to 1 or go from one-bedroom units to a studio unit if they were to comply with the parking requirement, which would not be consistent with the target housing production that we have for 413 units in the regional housing needs assessment for the 2015 to 2023 period. So staff recommends that this parking exception for the residential component is allowable. With regards to the parking exception for the commercial portion, we analyzed to see how much parking demand actually would be there. There is a number of spaces that are proposed in this facility which are ancillary storage and office spaces. So if you exclude them from the square footage, the parking demand would be 29 car spaces. The commission may wish to consider reducing the retail area by 1,500 square feet so that they comply. Right now, with 29 car space demand, they would be 5 short. So that is a consideration Planning Commission may wish to take into account. But in staff assessment, even if there is that 28% reduction made in the retail square footage, it would still be less than the required parking per code. So as proposed, it is nearly in compliance with as reasonably possible as could be. With regards to bike parking and EV charging stations, staff has included conditions of approval for them to be provided per standard. So that would mean 2 EV charging stations and bike parking for 5 bicycles, which would be per standard, by which I mean that they would need dimensional requirements and would be located convenient to pedestrian circulation routes. The other major item for consideration is skate park as a use, as well as its architectural design. There was noise, potential for noise was a consideration in analysis for the skate park. Staff has limited the hours of operation to 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Based on the noise analysis that was performed with the environmental document for this project. With regard to roof design and the enclosure design, as mentioned previously, the roof is a sloping roof attached to the second building number 2, and then the enclosure is all chain link fence. That in staff's assessment presents a very blank facade and a massive appearance. So we have included a condition or recommend a condition to scale this down by rethinking the roof and the enclosure to have maybe a different kind of a fence, which is more decorative in nature, or introduce some vertical elements. And we've included a condition where the applicant would need to present alternatives. And I defer to Christian Murdoch to speak to the trail easement.
Good evening, Commissioners. Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. Thank you for the introduction, Ranu. This project has an element which does not come up very often for projects before the Planning Commission, given its coastal orientation so close to the Pacific Ocean. There are considerations in the city's general plan, local coastal plan, and zoning ordinance with respect to public access to the coast. With respect to the 2 trail easements, one is an east-west easement across the site, which has a relationship to the site to the west and its future development potential. And there is a second easement in discussion. It's essentially a north-south easement from San Pedro Avenue across the western property line of the site, connecting to existing coastal access to the north behind the Pedro Point Shopping Center. The items that we have included in the conditions of approval relate to easements, but in fact they're irrevocable offers to dedicate easements. So it's an important but nuanced distinction. The way the conditions of approval are written, it would require the applicant for a period of 21 years to make an irrevocable offer of dedication to a public agency, which a public agency could accept within at any time within the 21-year dedication period, and then establish a trail within those easements. And so it's something that's a little bit diffuse and remote, but it's important to understand exactly what is being asked of the applicant and required of him in this particular project. There's no burden on the owner to build or maintain the trail or accept liability for its operation. The first easement that's in question here is the east-west easement. The general plan and local coastal plan talk about the total area between Danman and San Pedro Avenues to be developed as an integrated project. I think it's probably common sense to understand what the benefits and the synergies would be of the total site developing as a common project. The reality is that the applicant owns a portion of this site and critically owns that portion that is located between the bulk of the land to the west and the coastal access to the east and northeast. And so as a result, if this property were to develop without making provision for future access across the property to the coast from the property to the west, the potential is that that site could be landlocked and not able to develop with a coastal orientation in a manner consistent with the general plan. And so in order to find this project that's before you consistent with the general plan, it was important in staff's analysis to make reservation in that northern portion. Roughly, if you look on the screen up here, this northern section, which will be further highlighted in just a moment. It's not evident if you haven't been to the site from this aerial photo that the area along the north of the property is actually a large berm, and so there's not any convenient pedestrian access north-south directly to the coast. In addition, that direct access to the coast is also obstructed by existing residential development north of the private street that's labeled Shoreside Drive in this graphic. So to that end, staff has analyzed and included a proposed condition of approval which would require within the northerly 45 feet of this property, roughly that clouded area at the top of the property, to make that irrevocable offer of dedication for no more than, I believe, a 14-foot wide ultimate easement somewhere within that 45 feet to be determined at some point in the future by the public agency that was seeking to accept the offer of dedication of the easement. And as you can see, it would connect to the existing coastal trails behind and to the north of the Pedro Point Shopping Center. Forgive me. The second easement is required by Article 44 of the city's zoning regulations, and it relates to those properties located essentially between a public road and the sea, and so not developing sites in such a way that they would obstruct the public's right of access from the public right-of-way. And so you can see in that yellow shaded graphic there, that symbology, that's essentially the sidewalk pathway that's proposed by this project applicant. And so that easement, if ever accepted, but in the manner required to be offered by the applicant, would be essentially coexistent with that 6-foot sidewalk that's proposed and allow the public to take advantage of that existing developed access that would be otherwise for private access only, to then provide a public connection from the public right-of-way to the existing coastal trail. And so again, in the same manner as the other east-west cross-site easement that we talked about, this would be an offer of dedication of an easement to a public agency at some point in the future. And as noted, it's important as well to consider with this project overall that the Commission is being asked to adopt a mitigated negative declaration to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. And we do have Nick Papani and Katrina Krakow from the city's consultant environmental team to answer any questions in that regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that the conclusion of the staff report?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Excellent. Are there any questions for Ms. Agarwal or Mr. Murdoch at this point from the Commission? Is it the pleasure of the Commission to hear anything from maybe even a summary from our CEQA consultants with respect to the mitigated neg deck? Did you all want to say something briefly about it, or?
Good evening. Nick Papani with Rainey Planning and Management. As you are aware, the environmental document before you does determine certain potentially significant impacts upon the physical environment. However, in our analysis, we did not find any impacts that could not be reduced to less than significant levels through implementation of feasible mitigation measures. Those mitigation measures are set forth in the Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program, which is also a component of the approvals that needs to be adopted along with the CEQA document tonight. If there's any specific environmental issues or topics or mitigations that you have questions on, I'd be more than happy to answer those.
Thank you. Any questions or comments at this point? Well, not seeing any, we'll go ahead and keep you on standby.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, again, it didn't sound like there were any questions for Ms. Agarwal or Mr. Murdoch, and I think then that will go ahead and take us then to the applicant. The applicant will have an opportunity to share with us any comments he cares to with respect to the project.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the commission. I appreciate you guys taking the time to review my project. My name is Sean Rhodes. While surfing Mavericks and making a name in the surf industry, my partner, Greg Saban, and I opened the most well-established surf shop still in business on this coast in 1991, NorCal Surf Shop. Through the years, we have seen the demographics of consumers evolve and grow. I quickly realized we needed to grow the business to support the demands of the people residing on this coast, new and old, as well as providing jobs at all skill levels. Hence, researching and planning over 9 years a space that is bigger, providing more services, amenities, and products for these consumers, as well as the community we grew up with in Pacifica itself. While providing space for commercial retail use and middle-income apartments, my goal is to build a shop that facilitates growth for kids and adults with a passion for board sports and the ocean in a safe and healthy environment. My vision is to make my building environmentally friendly by being energy efficient, eventually 100% solar, green building, and recycling programs for both material waste and water. That's all I have. If you guys have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? I don't see any lights. Well, you may just want to hang tight. Okay. We may have more for you. Thank you. Okay. So we'll go ahead then and move to the comments that we have. I have a couple of speaker cards. One from Jeremy Greenberg, who will have address the commission first, and then Owen Brizes, it looks like. We'll start with Mr. Greenberg, if he's here.
My name is Jeremy Greenberg, and I live on 1348 Grand Avenue. I would be very close to this particular construction site and project, and I am strongly opposed to this thing being built, primarily because of the nuisance disruption of the neighborhood brought on by the construction of a skate park and a surf shop in this development. From my research into the matter, along with firsthand experience with neighborhood skate parks, is that they bring in a subculture of crime, drugs, vandalism, and violence. The common problems and complaints that come with skate parks is the loud noise of banging, scraping sounds, along with loud yelling and shouting. Many skate parks around the country have been forced to shut down due to the noise, drugs, trash, vandalism, and crime. This development would also add to the already over-congested traffic on Pedro Point, especially on weekends when it is often impossible to get through the congestion of surfers blocking access along San Pedro Avenue. I strongly recommend this commission reject this building permit. I think this would be a real serious disruption to the peace and quiet on Pedro Point. Plus, this is Pedro Point, the houses are all located uphill and would receive a lot of the loud noise from this skate park, which I think you said is going to operate between the hours of 7 a.m. in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. That's just unacceptable, I think. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Brizes?
Hello, my name is Owen Brizges. I live at 1203 Galvez Drive. Thanks for the time. As an idea, I really do like the idea of development on this site, especially a surf shop and a skate park. think that's one of the most vibrant areas of our city, and I think, this could, enhance that and provide a lot of positives. That being said, I think we need to hold ourselves to the highest standards when we're developing and our impact on the natural world. So for that point, I take two issues with this project. They both have to do with the west barrier of the proposed development, and it stems from, in the literature, in the documents presented, it refers to the natural riparian habitat there as a drainage ditch. And then it requires that drainage ditch be removed, or that riparian corridor be converted into a culvert, a buried pipe, and as described, a 6 foot wide sidewalk placed on top. And I take issue with the environmental assessment of that area. It is a natural waterway. It is a riparian habitat. If you go there right now, I was there this evening, there's standing water. It is wet, moist. It is rich with native plants that are visible. And with that comes, critical habitat for both threatened and endangered species that we have in our community. Red-legged frog, San Francisco garter snake, and it spills out into the San Pedro Creek, which has threatened steelhead trout. So one, critical habitat for those species is being eliminated. The second is we have, if you read the Pacifica Tribune, we have one of the dirtiest beaches in California. And that is largely due to stormwater runoff that comes from our community, gets into San Pedro Creek and outflows into the Pacific Ocean. This natural riparian environment helps drain the San Pedro Point and provides a place for natural filtration before that stormwater gets into the ocean. So I think there needs to be a better way of dealing with that part of the project. I think there's solutions, and a 6 foot sidewalk on top of that creek is not appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. I have one more speaker card for, it looks like Serena, perhaps that's Loomis. Ms. Loomis?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission. My name is Serena Loomis. I'm also a resident of Pedro Point. I'm also a business owner in the Pedro Point Shopping Center. I just wanted to address some of the concerns of the other resident about the subculture. So in our neighborhood, I think I've said this before about other projects in our neighborhood, but I think it's important to increase our property value. I think community building is a really great way of doing that. I think providing a place for kids to go and do things in a healthy way is a good way of building the community and increasing our property values and keeping the riffraff off the streets. I feel like that space is kind of a dead space at the moment, but has a potential to really increase the appeal of our neighborhood. So I'm in 100% support, regardless of the traffic and parking. It's really not that bad, and it sounds like the parking will be better if there are more spaces provided, which sounds like it's going to be. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Loomis. I don't have any other speaker cards. If there's anybody else interested in addressing the Commission on this matter, go ahead and submit your card. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and offer the applicant, if the applicant chooses to address any of the matters that have been raised.
Yeah, I'd just like to address some of the matters with the noise in relation to the guy that was just talking. There's a covered roof over it, so the noise isn't going to spread upwards into the neighborhoods. Not to mention that I've strategically placed the skate park behind the eucalyptus trees and behind the highest part of the existing building in Peter Point Shopping Center. So the noise isn't going to be an issue coming out of the skate park, especially if I have a roof over it. And then also, you know, one of the reasons that I'm doing this surf shop is to like help the kids and get them off the streets and get them into other, you know, more healthy activities, which is surfing and skateboarding. And it kind of takes a different kid that, you know, might not be a baseball or football player and puts him in a spot that he can actually excel in and feel comfortable because it's his own deal. And so I feel like the derelict thing is a thing of the past for skaters, and it's moving in a positive direction. It's in the X Games and stuff like that. And then there's no real derelict surfers, so I feel like that's probably a misspoken words. That's it.
Thank you very much. Looks like we can go ahead and close this portion of the consideration of the item, the public hearing aspect of it, and bring it back to the commission. I'll see if any of my colleagues have any comments or questions, or Commissioner Stedging.
Just as disclosure, I've discussed this project with two individuals, Jeremiah Johnson and Dave Colt, sometime in the past 3 years. This was on the docket there. I've noticed standing water at this location. This isn't a seasonal wetland, or what's the designation here?
I think I would defer to the environmental review team to further elaborate, but as disclosed in the initial study prepared for this project, it was recognized that there may be wetland habitat within that swale, but that this project was not going to impact it. And to clarify a misstatement, this project is not proposing to create a culvert of that swale or to pave over it or anything of that sort. That drainage feature is located west of the project site, and the improvements of this project, including the sidewalk, would be above the top of the bank of that drainage swale.
Okay, I don't need to hear from their CEQA engineer. That's sufficient. I have a further question on the staff's suggested mitigation of the fence requirement. Can you go over that again?
You're talking about the skate park fence?
There was some fence you mentioned that you were trying to get something
Maybe
different.
something different materials or different.
Right, they're proposing a chain link fence enclosure as of now, and we would be working with the applicant to work on a design which is more aesthetically pleasing as opposed to a chain link fence, and introduce some elements within the fence where the mass would be broken up so the building scale doesn't look so imposing.
And subsequent to publication of the packet, which included that discussion, we have had a conversation with the applicant. He has submitted at least one potential alternative that he was in favor of that staff also found to be much more aesthetically pleasing and to have a higher quality appearance than typical cyclone or chain link fencing. And so we believe that as the condition's written, if the commission were to support it, we do have sufficient flexibility and opportunity to correct that aesthetic impact with the applicant. Beyond just the fence, we're also hoping to break up that mass, as Ms. Agarwal mentioned, with either some vertical features or potentially some horizontal artistic type features as well, to just try to break up the large mass of a metal fencing along those two sides of the skate park.
Can you just I gotta admit, I was slightly surprised at the 47 vehicle requirement for commercial there. Can you just go over the math there, and it can be very brief. I'm just curious what would require 47 parking spots there?
So if you look at the table on packet page 206, this breaks down the different components of the development and the parking requirement per code, and how it adds up to a total of 50 spaces, which includes 3 spaces for residential.
And I think it can get lost in the details. In effect, the city's parking requirements requires a calculation that when there are multiple uses, aggregates the individual parking requirements for those uses into a total figure. It doesn't provide any offset for the reality that these uses are one cohesive type of operation, and that it's not a standalone office and a standalone retail and a standalone whatever. There is some synergy where they're not necessarily generating all of their own independent parking requirements. And in addition, as Ms. Agarwal indicated, The city's retail parking requirement in particular talks about gross leasable area. And for a project like this, where they do have a large amount of inventory and storage, that gross leasable area where they're keeping those products isn't necessarily generating customer traffic, if you will. They're not all on display at the same time. But as calculated in the zoning, it's resulting in this very tremendous parking requirement. And so with the offset calculation or analysis that Ms. Agarwal provided, we think the true parking demand is likely to be substantially less, perhaps even about half as much as what the zoning calculation actually totals. So we'd feel comfortable that you're not in effect granting, half of the spaces as an exception. It's some smaller number, I think, estimated at 5 spaces for the commercial
Right.
component.
Just a question, and this is just my own ignorance about it. In board shaping, is that actually some form of light manufacturing of boards? Is that?
It is. The specific activities that go into it could be better elaborated by the applicant, but yes, he's taking blanks, I think they may be called, and shaping them into finished surfboards. We've analyzed that as an ancillary activity to the retail use as a surf shop, and we think it's a unique, valuable element to it.
I would agree with that. I was just sort of curious about whether they really expected to have 4 people and 4 vehicles actually engaged in that activity at any given time. As I was thinking about the parking, for example, it struck me that might just be another example of maybe more parking than you'd really need if you were just applying a pure square footage
I believe that
analysis.
to be the case, yes, but the applicant could clarify the number of people that may be engaged at any one time.
Okay, all right. I actually would like, not seeing any more lights, I would actually like maybe a little more discussion. Noise had come up as something that was especially concerning, and I think it is something that we rightly should be concerned about. I would perhaps like to hear from our environmental consultants on sort of their thinking around the noise. And in particular, my concern is really one of maybe operating a skate park until 10 o'clock at night. I think it's a valuable and useful sort of use there, but again, I'm curious about what you have to say about it, in particular as we get into the later hours during the week.
Correct. Again, Nick Papani with Rainey Planning and Management. Absolutely. So we retained the services of a professional noise consultant, J.C. Brennan and Associates, who performed an analysis to look at the stationary noise from the proposed project, namely the skate park activities. What the consultant utilized some comparative data from a facility that was actually larger than the facility proposed here. So in that sense, believed it to be conservative in terms of the noise levels measured from that facility. Utilizing those levels and projecting out to the nearest receptors, residential receptors around this project, which the nearest of which would be to the northwest. The levels were determined to be in compliance with the daytime levels for stationary noise sources, the table of which is in the environmental document. It's table 9. So basically you have the 2 different standards. You have the noise standards for the 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. time frame, and then you have the noise standards from the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. time frame. And since the nighttime is more sensitive, because obviously it's quieter, the noise standard becomes more restrictive during the nighttime. So what the consultant found was that during those nighttime hours, that the skate park noise levels would exceed the standard during the nighttime hours. Again, during the daytime, the noise levels estimated at the nearest receptors would not exceed those standards, which again is 50 decibels. LEQ, which is an hourly standard, and then an L max, that's the maximum noise level that's at 70. That's the maximum that could be experienced at the residential receptor. So because of that, because the proposed skate park would exceed the nighttime standards, the mitigation in the document is to restrict the skate park activities to not extend beyond 10 p.m. So again, analysis looked at the nearest residential receptor and projected the estimated noise levels at that nearest receptor. And that's the conclusion. The mitigation as a result kind of helps guide the noise levels for the proposed project.
Yes, and as Mr. Papani mentioned, we mirrored the hours restriction to match the noise analysis that was performed, that distinction between daytime and nighttime noise. We understand there may be unique aspects of the community character or operation in that neighborhood that could warrant a further restriction. The applicant, in fact, has indicated he intends to operate far fewer hours per day, starting later in the day and ending earlier in the day. But we saw the rational basis as ensuring that it would not create a significant environmental impact as a starting point and allowing the commission to tailor that from there.
Sure. Now, is the 10 o'clock, is that a time, I'm trying to recall, what the chart actually looks like in our ordinance. Is that actually a time break in our ordinance? Is 10 o'clock relevant in terms of the way the ordinance is put together?
Correct, and also common for noise ordinances for other municipalities. It's typically stops at that 10 p.m. timeframe.
Right. My own personal, sort of view, which I guess is somewhat relevant to the conversation we're having, is that, that level of noise up to about 10 o'clock, maybe, notwithstanding the way the ordinance is written, might be something we want to take a look at and determine whether or not perhaps maybe a little earlier, a knockoff time, at least during the week, might be more appropriate.
And I think one of the goals in staff, or another goal in staff's drafting of that condition as it currently is not to make it so restrictive at the precise hours the applicant's indicating now, to provide some flexibility. We'd hate to have to come back to the Planning Commission to add a half hour here or there to the hours of operation.
Yeah, I understand. I was hoping maybe I could also just take one more look at the easement area, or the offer to dedicate. And I know you had there we go. And the other thing I saw, something you said caught my attention. I just wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed it. And candidly, I've not been out to the site myself, but you'd expressed some concerns about maybe landlocking the parcel, or the risk that the parcel could end up landlocked. And I know that we were sort of addressing things by way of trails here. In terms of developing the parcel that's adjacent to the left, as I'm looking at it anyway, would there at some juncture be at least feasible or theoretical road access available to those parcels, or that parcel, if in terms of future development?
Well, to be clear, the parcel to the west that we're describing as having the potential to be landlocked, if you will, would not be landlocked in the strict sense of access to a public right-of-way.
Yes.
It does have ample access from San Pedro Avenue.
Got it.
What's maybe not clear in this graphic, but is more clear here, it's a very large parcel.
Yep.
This entire area here, which you can see is accessible along San Pedro Avenue. The issue is for convenient public access to the coast. Providing that access across the northerly portion of the project site would provide the greatest and most logical linkage to existing coastal access behind the Pedro Point Shopping Center.
I see your point.
So that's the rationale for the location of this offer to dedicate.
Got it. One other quick question then. I see a couple of, I guess they're paper streets, some lines in purple. Are those paper streets, and do they have any relevance to sort of what we're doing here?
Right. I don't have the specifics on whether they're technically public rights-of-way or not. My sense is that they may not be. But they're entirely and wholly owned by the same property owner currently. And so I would suggest that it's unlikely that a future project would rely on those as the rights-of-way for that project.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? Commissioner Stejnik.
Yeah, I have a question for the Rainey Group, if possible. Yeah. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but we received a couple letters on the noise issue from the public. I'm curious, there's virtually no protections for eucalyptus trees in the city of Pacifica. Assuming those trees didn't exist, how would that affect your noise measurements?
Yes, it's a good question. In order for vegetation to provide noise attenuation, I don't have the specific metrics, but it has to be fairly wide swath of vegetation to actually provide noise attenuation. That's something that's often suggested as a possible mitigation, but all the consultants that I've worked with have said, it really has to be something fairly substantial to provide noise attenuation. So if those eucalyptus trees were not on the property or along that edge, then I don't think it would have a material effect, because it does have to be something wider than that to really kind of have a benefit. So in terms of the noise analysis that was performed by our consultant, he didn't factor in any sort of reduction for those features.
And when you chose your sample noise that represented roughly the same size or larger, was that from inside the building or outside the building? And was the building of similar construction? Or how can you equate that, just out of curiosity?
Sure. It was an outdoor skate park, and so it was measured from the outdoor activity levels. It wasn't within a building or shielded in any way, shape, or form.
I just have questions. I frequent that area at night fishing on a regular basis, and it's not unusual to see trucks cooking methamphetamine in that parking lot. I'm just curious how they're going to secure that area at night beyond the fence, just prevent unauthorized users from using that area at night.
That might be a question for the applicant.
Yeah, I think we defer to the applicant on that.
Are you talking about the skate park?
Yeah, just
The skate park is going to be chain link fence ceiling to floor, and there's only going to be times to skate. That's part of the reason for the skate park, is there's only times to skate. It's not a public access skate park like the other skate park in Pacifica. The gate opens at 9 and automatically closes at 6. So mine is going to be monitored, but mainly there's going to be a lot of lighting on the property, and then the cyclone fencing in to keep them out.
But essentially, you all have locked doors preventing people from skating there at 2 a.m.
There's only one door into the skate park.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I guess then we're kind of at the stage where perhaps we can, hear from commissioners with respect to their dispositions with respect to the project, or frankly, we could even entertain a motion if folks were at that stage.
Commissioner Niblin, I'd like to maybe reference 2 more factual points for the record. To round out the discussion of noise impacts, you'll see on page 70 of the initial study that was prepared in the noise section. The noise modeling was based off of the nearest residence located approximately 175 feet north of the skate park. And so mathematically, any other structure, a greater distance, in general would have an equal or lesser resulting noise impact. And so with the nearest residences existing off the project site, at least several hundred feet, I think that particularly the nighttime levels, but the daytime levels as well, would not be likely to exceed any applicable noise standard.
Well, and go ahead and translate that from noise standards then into, sort of whether or not there are any particularly sensitive receptors who'd be likely to, we can never predict, but feel like they're being impacted in some way.
So in simpler terms, the daytime noise level for the skate park was calculated well below the applicable threshold at the nearest residence, 175 feet to the north. The nighttime noise level was calculated at an outdoor level to exceed 1 decibel. But with the attenuation provided by the structures, that interior nighttime noise level would not be exceeded. So any structure that's located farther, like the single-family residences along San Pedro Avenue, Grand Avenue, Livingston Avenue, that grouping of the next nearest single-family residences, they would not be affected with excessive noise levels, because the sound attenuates as the distance increases. The other point to the public commenter, Mr. Brisgis, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing, he mentioned concerns about stormwater discharges from the site. I want to note for the record, this project is designed to comply with what are known as the C3 stormwater requirements. They implement the nationwide pollutant discharge elimination system NPDES permitting requirements, and they do require that the stormwater generated on the site is captured, it's treated and retained, and then metered out at a controlled rate. And so, in fact, it would be very close to mimicking, if not mimicking, the pre-development discharge levels. And so it's important to note that it's not a free-for-all pouring into the ditch. It is a treated, engineered, managed stormwater system. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stedjink, is that your light?
Yeah, my question is for staff. Is there a current application on the adjacent parcel, Carlson Field?
No.
Maybe I imagine it, but I thought I saw Commissioner Niblin taking a look at those hours and thinking maybe those might be managed for the neighborhood's better benefit. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, I wasn't, you have deeper knowledge than I do about some of the other things that might be percolating. I was just, again, expressing some concern about 10 o'clock as sort of hours, particularly Sunday to Thursday night. I just, again, recognizing that there's some very, very good work that's been done around noise impacts. Some of it might involve the comings and goings and sort of level of activity in the area, even that maybe isn't strictly speaking the noise per se, but maybe secondary things that flow from people coming and going. I, again, would be more comfortable, I think, with a closing time more like 9 o'clock during those, what I'll call school nights.
I would be absolutely in agreement with that. I recognize that the applicant has been widely recognized as a good corporate citizen. I just, I see you've got 6, maybe 5 without the firehouse houses backing up to there, and I'm assuming the berm is going to protect the ones along the seashore, but I'd be willing to, in a year, if there's no complaints and your neighbors are in compliance, take a look and say, yeah, 10 p.m.'s not a problem there, but I think 9 p.m. might be a more reasonable solution for dropping on the neighborhood as it stands.
I think we'll go ahead and entertain a comment from the applicant. We'll go ahead and allow that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem changing the times. 8 o'clock was the latest that anyone was going to be skating, and that would only be on certain times. And then 10 o'clock was probably the earliest I would even open it. So the shop hours are 8 on Saturday and 9 on the rest of the times. And so I would probably open at 9 on the weekends and 10 on the weekdays. And then it would be maybe 8 on the weekends and probably, on the weekdays, and then a little earlier on the weekends.
Thank you. And I think in light of that, again, I would be, in light of Mr. Murdoch's kind of wise comment that we perhaps try to afford some flexibility for the future that would not necessitate coming back, for adjustments in the future. Again, I'm comfortable with 9 o'clock, Sunday to Thursday night, and then as late as 10 o'clock on weekends, Friday and Saturday night. I don't know if my fellow commissioners are aligned with that. So that's the only adjustment, the condition of approval I would want if someone were to make a motion, which I would certainly entertain at this point.
Is that the only waiver we made, the hours?
That's the only adjustment that I would feel like was needed. So I'm happy to call the question. If not, I'm happy to make a motion myself.
Why don't you make that motion and
I'll go ahead and make a motion then, unless anybody else feels inclined to. All right. So I'm going to move to adopt the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting program for the project. I move to approve the site development permit PSD 78914, coastal development permit CDP 34614, use permit UP 03914, parking exception PE 15914, and sign exception SC 03018, and to authorize removal of heritage trees by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A, with the exception, again, of the adjustment to the operating hours for the skate park, as we've just discussed, which is to say no later than 9 o'clock Sunday night to Thursday night, and 10 o'clock Friday night and Saturday night. And the MMRP included as Exhibit A, and to incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference. Commissioner Rubenstein.
I'll second the motion.
Well, we've got a motion and a second. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Okay, it looks like we have, it's unanimous, and it looks like all of us voted in favor. I think that I may have pushed the wrong button somewhere, or somebody did. I apologize for that. But I'd say unanimously approved. Okay, well, that's item 6. That'll take us then to communications. Are there any commission communications? See no lights for that. We'll move then to staff communications.
Sure, I just have a couple updates. One for scheduling. The next regular meeting is Monday, November 19th. You're scheduled to hear the sea level rise adaptation policies, and so we anticipate that will have quite a bit of public comment. And we are going to start that meeting at 6 p.m. So I spoke to the chair today, and so please note that on your calendars an early start. And then I wanted to report that for the redistricting or the districting special meetings, the council will not need our regular December 3rd date, so that'll be a regular meeting on Monday, not a Tuesday for the commission. And then I also wanted to provide an update on the council's action at their last meeting, October 22nd, when there were several items that had been before the Planning Commission. So the council introduced the development agreement ordinance with no changes. They introduced the ordinance amending the marijuana use permit application procedures for initial applications. The only amendment they made to the Planning Commission's action was to increase the days that an applicant has to become complete to 20 working days. It was 10 previously. They recognize that some of the application requirements are fairly rigorous. And then finally, the City Council denied the appeal and upheld the Planning Commission's approval of marijuana use permit 418, which was for 2270 Palmetto. And they did make amendments to the conditions to allow an 8 p.m. close for the business and to remove the requirement for a unique identifier system and remove the condition regarding gummies, because it was basically a condition that was consistent with state law.
All right, thank you. Did you have a comment, Commissioner Stedgen?
Yeah, just going one step back, can you just go real quick what our role in the SLR adaptation policies will be?
So your role will be providing input on the policies, and then that will go, your input as well as the entire package will be going to Planning Commission on City Council on December 10th. And then we will be incorporating those policies into the larger local coastal plan update. And because the local coastal plan is much more than just adaptation policies, we're reintroducing that to the community, to Planning Commission, City Councils, along with our general plan. And so the actual recommendation for adoption will come later in 2019.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn then. Commissioner Stedgen.
Second.
Okay, well, we've got a motion. I'll second that motion. We'll go ahead and you were
make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it, and we'll go ahead and vote, please. All right. Thank you. We're adjourned. How's the hand doing?
I don't know.
Excellent.
It's healing up.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Exciting times at the Kraske, huh?
Yeah, the track and trace from the state.
Yeah, the Kraske time. That's right.
Yeah, and they're